Thanks for joining us on our discussion about business continuity and disaster recovery, and really answering that question: can your business not only survive but thrive in the chaos of a disaster recovery scenario? Um, so, with that, a little bit about myself. My name is Chris Morey. I'm the IT Services Manager here at Electronic Communications Services, ECS. There's no limit of acronyms in the IT world. I have about 15 years of experience managing technology in the surrounding area and nationwide. I participated and led many business recoveries over the years. I was at that forefront when ransomware really started to become a thing. Um, not only protecting against it, but also dealing with the aftermath of it as well. So I come with a lot of experience from the disaster recovery world. So if anyone has watched our previous webinars, this one, I might be the most lively because I've been through so many of these. So with that, I do want to introduce Jeff Lytle here. He's our sales manager and our owner here. He's going to give you a little bit of history about ourselves, him, our company, and then we'll get into the presentation.
All right, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. As Chris said, my name is Jeff Lytle. I'm one of the owners here at ECS. I just wanted to give a brief overview of who we are and how we became a managed service provider before Chris gets started. We are celebrating our 35th year in business this year, and we've always offered a variety of technology to businesses locally and hotels all over the country. Our team currently consists of 14 team members. We're actively looking to continue to grow, and we recently moved into Erie from Albion and are located at West Grandview and Peach Street. Our products and services have grown dramatically over the years. Today, we offer voice solutions that include phone systems and cell phone signal boosters, security solutions that include video surveillance, access control, and visitor management, audio-visual solutions that include sound systems, paging, and meeting room AV, low voltage cabling, and our latest offering is managed IT services. So, as a small business ourselves, we were faced with the dilemma of how to manage our own internal technology. Historically, we had one of our own technicians support our technology as needed, but today's technology is very different than yesterday's technology. Today, technology needs to be managed and monitored so it stays up to date in order to function efficiently and stay as secure as possible. Managing this technology is a full-time job, and small businesses not only need the proper tools to do so, but are also faced with either having to hire additional staff, redirect existing staff from their current responsibilities, or sign with a managed service provider. Prior to offering managed IT services, we here at ECS were faced with the same choice. We didn't want to take existing technicians away from their typical job duties supporting our customers, so we decided that working with a managed service provider would be more cost effective than hiring someone, and we felt the benefits of having an IT team supporting us made the most sense for our business. While we were working with this particular MSP, our existing customers started asking if we offered IT services, and we felt we could offer a better form of managed IT services than what we had access to. We feel a successful relationship between an MSP and a customer is one that is a true partnership. The goal of an MSP customer relationship is to not only make sure expectations are being met, but to also ensure that the customer is able to focus on their business and not have to worry about their technology. Today, we are rapidly growing our IT customer base while continuing to offer all the voice, security, and AV products and services I mentioned, therefore allowing us to truly offer almost all the technology a business needs. Before I hand it back to Chris, I do want to thank you all again for joining us today. Chris has a great presentation going over business continuity and disaster recovery. This topic is critical for businesses of all sizes and really encompasses a variety of different topics. Business continuity doesn't only apply to disasters, it really applies to any type of disruption. We ourselves migrated our file storage from on-premise servers to the cloud, and we needed to have a continuity plan to make sure our users were impacted as least as possible and needed the right plan and tools in place to recover our data in the event an issue arose during the migration. So it really applies to a variety of scenarios. But with that, I will hand it back to Chris.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jeff. Um, one area to discuss some business continuity as well. We're going to get right into that first slide. What is business continuity? Why does it matter? Jeff commented previously that, hey, we just moved our business offices. We moved from Albion into Erie. Part of our business continuity plan during our move was, hey, our technicians still need to work, our clients still need to be serviced, our sales team still needs to be able to do their thing, but we were straddling two different offices while we were remodeling the new office. So our business continuity plan really dictated a lot of different layers, working with our internet service provider to make sure we had new internet service that wasn't going to affect our old internet service and our bills weren't going to be, skyrocketing out of control for a few months. So there's a lot of pieces to business continuity that's not just disaster recovery planning. So business continuity can really, stem from a lot of different areas, and we're going to cover quite a few different things that matter for business continuity. I'm going to be using the words disaster recovery quite a bit because disasters are one of the main things that people recognize when you're talking business continuity. But any of these things that I'm mentioning, any of the things that we're talking about, what you can do, they apply to any business continuity scenario. So certainly I'm going to cover a wide range of topics with that. Um, but certainly things that you should be asking yourselves as business owners. What is your disaster recovery plan? So if a disaster were to happen, what is your game plan for getting back to business? Having a backup is not a disaster recovery plan. It's you have a backup. Does the backup work? Is the backup encrypted? Did the bad guys steal your backup as well? Having a backup is not a business continuity plan. It should be part of business continuity. It should include business continuity, but disaster recovery is just one piece of that aspect. One thing that you can be doing right now is to really fire drill your plan. So fire drills, they're great, great little tool you can use. Fire drills themselves, hey, they're regularly testing somebody's plan. Way back in elementary school, maybe even sometimes in high school, depending on where you went, you might have done fire drills when you were in school. Those fire drills, hey, they were fun breaks from the norm, from everyday schoolwork. Hey, you loved as a student, you heard, hey, there might be a fire drill today. Oh, please happen during that test. I really don't want to do that test. Hey, it was great for the students. They learned a few pieces along the way, how to orderly exit the building. But really, who benefited from those fire drills? Well, the teachers and the administration benefit from those fire drills because after those fire drills, they're going to sit down, they're going to sit at the table, they're going to find out what went wrong in that fire drill. Why did it take 5 minutes to get everyone out of the building when it should have taken 2 minutes to get out of the building? Game plan those scenarios so that you know what to expect. When you have that proper plan in place, hey, you can start working through all those exceptions to the rules. So, hey, you can know how to get the students out of the building in a line. You can have them orderly leave a classroom and meet in the assigned meeting place and do the head count, make sure everything's great. Exceptions to that plan need to be considered, but they can't be considered until you run the test first. I can get the students out in 2 minutes. I've passed that goal. Great. Now, what could happen to push that back up to 5 minutes? Oh, Sally broke her leg at playing soccer last week. So now she's in a cast. Now she can't get out in 2 minutes like we had originally planned. Well, now we have an exception to that rule so we can game plan. Does a student have, some sort of, lingering issue that might, prevent them from getting out of the building effectively? Game planning those decisions. Hey, you're going to have that plan in place so that that teacher knows when that fire alarm rings, there's no question in their mind. They know exactly what to do. They know who to call on to make sure that Sally gets out of the building effectively. So when you're dealing with those types of scenarios in the business world, what could be a broken leg? Hey, that broken leg could be, how did that ransomware get in? Who clicked on what link? We don't know yet. So how can you start recovering your data until you know the entry point of that bad actor? If somebody destroyed a database on accident, when did they click that button that destroyed that database? Was that 2 weeks ago? Was that 3 weeks ago? How long is it going to take to determine when can you recover that data? I'm going to have a couple of points later that are going to be about recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. So recovery point objectives, how far back can you go in your backups? And recovery time objective, how long can you be down before things start impacting the rest of your business? So How far can you go back and how quickly can you recover? Those are things that you should be game planning during your fire drill. When you're sitting down and even mentally planning, what would I do if all my files were encrypted by ransomware? What would happen in that scenario? What's my first things that I would do? Planning those things out, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. Start with something small. Start with hey, I don't have access to my files for 2 days. Simple scenario to deal with. You put a scenario in front of your mind and you start thinking, I don't have access to any of my digital files for 2 days. What do I do? Start listing out what you think you might have access to. Do you have access to all your accounting records? Maybe your accounting is fine, so you at least know who you owe money to and who owes money to you. That can at least get you going in your business for a few days. But maybe you reverse that scenario through that plan and you say, hey, I can't access my accounting software. I don't know who owes me money and I don't know who I owe money to, but I have access to my data. So run through some of those scenarios, even in your own head, to get a start of this. But that's what I mean with fire drills, game planning those things so that when the emergency happens, you know what to do. Those EMS technicians, when they arrive with an ambulance, they don't know what they're walking into, but they've experienced similar things to this. So they can put those pieces together. So when you're dealing with that disaster recovery scenario and you don't have access to your data, there's a calm breath because you already know what to do. It doesn't matter all those little variables because you know how you're going to handle things. When we're talking about backups, there are a lot of backup rules out there. The simplest one is this backup rule of 3-2-3. Used to be as simple as 3-2-1. We got to make things more complicated in IT as we go here. So the backup rule of 3-2-3, what that means is that you have 3 data copies of your data. You have one copy that is your live data. So that's what you're running on, that's what you're using, that's what you're manipulating on a day-to-day basis. Those are your live emails, that's your live accounting data points, all of your transactions, everything that you have running, that's live, that's your one data copy. Then you have 2 backup copies, 2 different media type copies. What that means is you might have a separate PC that sits separate to your PC that copies all of your stuff in an encrypted format and keeps all of your files encrypted on a periodic basis. Maybe that's every 15 minutes. Maybe that's every hour. Maybe that's once a day. It's up to you as a business owner to decide your recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. Another media type that you should have is a hard copy of your data, either a USB drive, a printed up copy, something that is hard data that is encrypted. It can't be actually accessed unless you are the one accessing it. And then that device is also offsite as well. That could be in a location like a safety deposit box, or a safe at home, something that's separate from your building. Because if you lose access to your office in your building, what are you going to do in that scenario? I have a couple of examples of that in just a few slides here. So the backup rule of 3-2-3, 3 data copies. So you have your live data, you have your first backup that's running pretty consistently, and then you have your third backup or your secondary backup, your third copy of your data. That might happen once a month, once a year, depending on when you close your fiscal year, depending on your business needs. Hey, you take that USB drive, you make a copy of it, it's encrypted, you put it in the safety deposit box. Once a year, you go through that process and you refresh it, make sure that that data is up to date. So we're going to get into a few things here that are going to specifically discuss about some business interruptions. I like to use this phrase, the business prevention team is hard at work. Because there's a lot of times in our lives when we're sitting there and like, there's got to be some team out there that's really preventing me from doing this work. It can't just be me right now, right? There's some technology that's out there, internet's not working right, something's not working. The business prevention team is out there, making sure you can't do what you need to do. And these are any unexpected business interruptions. Those disaster recoveries that I mentioned, they can stem from any number of disruptive events. They can happen from ransomware events, from cyber events. They can happen from natural disasters, things out of our control completely. They can happen from staffing and scheduling interruptions, things that, again, technology can help you with if you're utilizing it properly. So there's a lot of things that can happen that are going to be in this business prevention team. You can see our graphic design team came up with some fun little icons to represent that business prevention team, some bugs, some natural disasters, fire, just some interruptions. So on the ransomware and cybersecurity events, the first thing I always want to ask about anytime someone calls me up and says, "Hey, I got ransomware," or "Hey, what do I do in the event of ransomware?" My very first question to them always has to be, is your insurance going to cover any loss? You have a business insurance, it's going to cover you on multiple different types of losses in your business. Well, this is a cyber security event, a ransomware, that's a loss in your business. If you don't have cyber liability insurance from your business insurance provider, go and ask them about that. A lot of what I do and build my security recommendations around is based on what insurance companies are requesting in cyber liability insurance. Again, I'm going to discuss that a little bit here towards the end about what cyber liability insurance can do for you, what it means. But in that ransomware event, in that cybersecurity event, some of those key questions you need to be asking yourself beforehand, going into that fire drill, is how long is it going to take to restore your data? That recovery time objective, the RTO. Again, we're in IT, we gotta love our acronyms. So recovery time objective. How long is it going to take to recover your data? If you lost everything, is it going to take a half hour to restore all your data, or is it going to take 3 weeks to restore your data? Well, the only way to know that is to test it, to run a fire drill of your backup plan. Know that it's going to work, do some test restores, know how long that's going to take. The secondary question is, how will you do it? Because you might have a backup, but how does that process actually work? Well, now you're in that emergency mode. You are the EMS driver driving that ambulance, going up to that, call that you don't know what you're about to run into. Well, how are you going to restore that data? Well, if you've practiced it or you have an IT company that's helping you manage it, they should have that practice in there. They should have that knowledge base to say, hey, we got it covered. We know what our game plan is. Let's just execute the game plan. We have it ready to go. Another important thing to think about when you're really talking about ransomware is your data encrypted? Because when it comes to ransomware, it doesn't matter how quickly you can restore your data. It doesn't matter how many data points that you have. Can you actually restore your data back to before the ransomware started? None of that really matters if the bad actors have your data and it's not encrypted. What that means is, say they're able to, get an Excel file from you, and that Excel file has credit card information or social security information or any personal identifiable information in it. Well, if it's just a basic Excel file, it might be encrypted to you because you have to log in to access that Excel file. You might have to have multi-factor to get at that Excel file. But if the bad actors have that Excel file and can just open it, well, then it's not an encrypted file because they were able to see it and use it. So say that ransomware event does happen and that bad actor gets all of your data. Well, you can restore your data and you can be back in business. But now all of your client data, all your data is still in the hands of the bad actor. You didn't, tell them to delete the data. They don't care. You might get that warning that says, hey, we're going to delete all your data in 30 days if you will pay us the ransom. They're going to delete your access to the data, but they're going to hang on to it. Data is one of the most valuable resources on this planet right now. There's no number monetary thing that we can put on it. But typically in the past, 40, 50 years, it's really been oil has been the hottest commodity and the most expensive commodity out there. Data is what's the new commodity. Data is the new oil. So we need to protect our own data here. Things like human error certainly can create that cybersecurity event. I kind of commented on that earlier. Somebody can delete a file by accident. Somebody can corrupt a database by accident. They go in there and they type, someone owes you $100,000 invoice. They go in and type in, 100 million, and that 100 million actually screwed up the calculations across the board, and you don't notice it for a month. And when you run those month-end reports, okay, when did they go in and change that? And how are you going to restore that data now that you have a month's worth of data? So things to consider when you're dealing with a fire drill scenario. You might be able to restore your data, but what happens if you overwrite valid data? Do you have that ability to go back a couple weeks? Things to, think about there. Um, Public relations, certainly something you need to consider in any ransomware or cybersecurity event. Have something in your employee manual that dictates what to do in a cybersecurity event that deals with public relations. One of the worst things that can happen to any business is you get ransomware. The IT staff and the management, the owner staff, we're all working through that issue, trying to figure out what the best case scenario is. And then someone over on that sales team or the accounting team tweets out on their public account, on their public account, hey, my business is down with ransomware. I'm just sitting here not doing anything today. That's not what you want to be presenting as an image to the public. So if you have things in your policy that say this is how we're going to approach this with the public, hey, that covers you on a lot of those bases. Those things should be part of your business continuity plan and your disaster recovery plan. How are you going to communicate what happened to your staff, to your friends, to your family, to the media, if needed? All those things need to be accounted for. You may not consider, small business, well, I'm not going to get out into the media here. Well, if you're the lightning rod in town that gets ransomware and spreads it around, it might still come back to you from that media perspective. So have a game plan in place. What would you say when something like that would happen? So things that I'm not an expert in, I'm not a public relations person, but I've seen some really bad examples of public relations in the disaster recovery scenarios. It's there's a lot of bad examples out there. I'm sure everyone's seen it in the news. Someone has an outage, their business is closed. There's a lot of hush about it. Hey, contacting authorities. You know, I can read through the lines. I'm an IT person. Sometimes honesty is the best policy, but sometimes it's not as well. Sometimes you just need to tell people only what they need to know and nothing further. So have a public relations policy that's part of all of this planning, because that can be one of the most disastrous effects of this isn't that you had ransomware. Hey, you got your data recovered and everything was encrypted. The bad actors don't have your data. Everything's great moving forward. Well, the public relations say you got ransomware. How secure are you? Are you really trustworthy moving forward? Doesn't matter that you went through all those steps to make sure that that data is secured. You still have that public relation out there. So something to keep a eye on there. Natural disasters. There's a lot of natural disasters that can happen no matter where you live. If you're joining us from the Erie County region, you might say to yourself, well, natural disasters don't really happen that much in Erie, Pennsylvania. There was that one day, 6 years ago, that we got 5 feet of snow in one night. Well, I mean, I made it to work the next day, but I'm a crazy person. But how do people plan to work from home? How do they work from anywhere? Natural disasters could be a pandemic. Everyone went through that all at the same time. Everyone knows how they responded to that and how they dealt with it. Well, when it came to working, most people were just told, go work from home, take your devices home, we'll deal with everything later. Most companies didn't come back and deal with anything later. So, you're dealing with a lot of companies that have just personal devices that are out at somebody's home, no protection on the network. validate what other people are doing. So in these natural disasters, you got a game plan and know what you're going to do in these. Staying connected with your clients and your teams so that you know what's going on and they know what's going on. If you've lost your office and you don't have access to your office, your clients need to know to stop sending mail to your office. Um, those things can happen. Um, when I say those utility pulled down scenarios, there's a couple great examples that I've had over the years for these. Um, One great example is I had an accounting firm in downtown Pittsburgh. They were in one of those high rises, a 40-story building in downtown Pittsburgh. They were working there for years. They had about 15 years in this office, and everything had been great. I had been backing up their solutions for a few years at this point. Well, all of a sudden, one day, their fire alarm goes off. They don't know what's going on. This was not a drill that was announced to them, so they have to assume it's a real fire. Well, the owner and myself have already been through that scenario because they've been using my backup solution for so long. They know that part of the recovery scenario is there's a physical box that's sitting in their office, sitting right next to the owner. He needs to grab that box, unplug it. Don't worry about shutting it down. Unplug it and pull it with him, rip it out the wall if he has to. That's his main box. We had his data offsite, we had his data covered in multiple areas, but that was the emergency box, the just in case break glass in case of emergency box. We're really glad that he took that box with him because that fire actually ended up being a fire in the building next door to him. That building ended up being condemned. His building was actually shut down for over a year because once the fire inspectors came in, they found that that building wasn't up to code either. So no one was allowed in that building ever again. From that day moving forward, for almost a year, they weren't able to access that building. So I'm really glad that he took that box because that very next day, that business owner, what he was doing was he was working with a local hotel, got into their conference center, rented a nice space. All of his employees reported to work there with their laptops that they already all had. We had their original box in case of glass emergency box we ripped out. Well, hey, that day we reconfigured that box so it's a live system. They're up and working in a day. They continued to have to work there for many months and then come up with a new plan and a new scenario when they found out they were going to have to be there for a year. But hey, those are the exceptions to the plan that have to be accounted for. So you don't know what could happen. Something could happen to your neighbor that's going to affect you for a long period of time. Same thing can happen with ransomware. One of your vendors or one of your clients gets ransomware. Now you're getting that suspicious email from them, but hey, you were waiting for an email from them and you open it. Now you have ransomware. That same type of scenario, that building next door caught on fire. Hey, I'm out of my office for a year now because my office was basically condemned for a year. Same concept, ransomware, it spreads and it affects everyone. So these disasters, they can, appear as many different types of things. Um, that utility pull down scenario, that can actually happen. Did have a client that literally the pole out in front of their building was hit by a semi truck. That pole carried their internet. Okay, well, when a pole gets knocked down, the very first company that's called is the electric company. The electric company comes out, puts a new pole in, puts the electric wires back up. Then the telecommunication companies come in. Well, if the electric company is down for 3 days and your pole isn't up for 3 days, that means telecommunications is even longer than that. So how is your business going to run and operate when it doesn't have a physical internet connection anymore? Do you have a 4G or 5G backup internet service? Those are things to consider when you're, thinking about what could happen to your business. What happens if you lost internet for a long period of time? We're so reliant on the internet nowadays. We're so just accustomed to it working. Even when our Wi-Fi is not working, our cell phones are still working because of that 4G and 5G connection. But how much data are you allowed on your connections from your business plan? Would you be able to run your business from that? In this scenario here, I'm running this webinar right now. What happens if an hour ago we lost internet? What's going to happen when, I need to run an entire hour-long video with, sharing my screen? It's going to use a lot of data. Do we have a plan in place for that? We ourselves, we have multiple plans in place because, not to, show you too much, but of course that's not going to show very well. I have my spare laptop here that's connected to 4G. That's ready to go. I have plenty of data on my plan. I also brought in a spare microphone because I don't know if my microphone's going to make it through the whole meeting. But again, business continuity scenarios that really apply to anything that could happen. So, when you're thinking fire drill, you might be almost thinking that there's too much to plan on. Start with the basics, just like you did in elementary school. Start with the basics. Can everyone get in line? Can we get out of the building? And can we do a head count? We can do those three basic things. Okay, let's time it. Can those basic things work? Great. We can do the basics. We know that we have a plan in place if the internet goes down. Our business plan is we have some 4G hotspots as well. We have plenty of data available. We can do on-demand data as needed, but that's our game plan. That's our disaster recovery scenario. If we lose internet for a long period of time, hey, we're going to move to 4G hotspots. Really, the only question becomes at what time do we turn on the 4G hotspots versus waiting for the internet to turn back on? So again, coming back to that recovery time objective, how much time do you need before you need to be back up in business? Again, there's a lot of scenarios when you're dealing with ransomware that you might be able to get access to some of your data, but maybe not all of your data. What's the most important data first? Know that in your mind. So when something does happen and that IT person comes to you and says, I can restore all your data, it's going to take me 3 days. You can go to them and say, hey, I'm going to be out of luck if I don't have this folder or this set of email or this data in the next 2 hours. Can you focus on that first? Maybe that's even been part of a fire drill that you've already ran, and the IT person already has that and documented that. So having those scenarios in play, enables you to kind of conquer anything. When I was developing that backup or the business continuity game plan with that client down in Pittsburgh, we never envisioned that a fire would happen next door and that scenario would happen. It was never in our thought process. But what was in our thought process was, what if we don't have access to your building anymore? And that's where we started that scenario. So we didn't know, hey, we were going to have to go to, multiple different hotels to try to find the best price. So the business owner had to go and do that. But they knew that was going to be their game plan. If they were going to be out for a few days, we were just going to go to a conference center and we were going to rent space. Okay, that's the game plan. We knew what it was. It happened immediately. There was no, what are we going to do now? It was already answered. Some scheduling and staffing interruptions. It's another key area of things that can, cause a business continuity scenario. Not necessarily disaster recovery, but it could be. When we're talking about scheduling and staffing interruptions, it really is, your longer than expected meetings. I keep looking down at my clock to make sure I'm on track here with this presentation. I'm actually a little bit ahead of time, so that's great. But when you have an longer than expected meeting, well, say you have a meeting at 2 o'clock, that's the important meeting. You scheduled a meeting right up until 2 o'clock. You don't have any transition time. You're not going to be able to, prep yourself even mentally to transition the call. Your previous call is gonna go over 1 or 2 minutes. Every call does, because you realize, oh, it's 2 o'clock. I got to get off this call. How do I get off this call? So things that using technology can definitely help you do that. Overutilization of your staff, your tools, your resources, even yourself. How do you track, are you being overutilized? You might say to yourself, hey, I feel overutilized because I know I am, but what tools are in place to show that and track that? How many clients do you have requesting info from you? How do you know that on a day-to-day basis? Are your tools being overtaxed? I had an example the other day where someone was sending out marketing emails. Well, the IT group, we didn't know that marketing was sending out 30,000 emails on a Monday and a Tuesday. Well, when you're sending out that many marketing emails, there's a lot of things in IT that we want to double check and make sure that are in place properly so that everyone's going to receive all those emails properly. We don't want to just blast out 60,000 emails and hope that it all works. So those tools were overutilized and overtaxed. Those weren't the right tools to be using to send out 60,000 emails. So tracking what's being used and how it's being used is always critical. Your leave of absences, when someone's out for a long period of time, how are you going to work with that? I had an example of this week. There's been some sickness going around town, but this week I wasn't feeling all that well myself. There were still things that were happening this week, but I was out. There needs to be a backup plan in place, a business continuity plan in place. I'm not going to cancel this webinar just because I'm, not feeling well. I'm either going to push through it because that's who I am, or Jeff, someone else on my team, has been through this presentation with me before. They know what to expect. They know what to say. They can step in my place. Another big item that we had this week was a phone system go live. I was transitioning somebody's phone system from one vendor to the other. Again, that's a lot of knowledge that I built in working with this client one-on-one for weeks to make sure that their call flow expectation was set correctly. When somebody calls their number, it's going to do exactly what that business owner expects it to do. Well, I have all that information, and I better not be keeping it in my head, because if I'm keeping it in my head and I'm out sick, no one can fill in for me. So we have processes and plans in place that make sure that when I'm talking to a client, I have my notes and there's a standard set of documentation that we have to gather info from businesses for phone systems. Anyone else on my team can open up that same standard document, read through every note that I've taken, every configuration setting that I've done and why. They can take that over probably within 20, 30 minutes after reading that document. They can take over the whole project because we have plans in place that make sure that a leave of absence isn't going to affect our business. So any sort of leave of absence, you got to have a plan and a place and on board to make sure things are going to continue working. So when you're thinking about fire drill scenarios, hey, what happens when Jeff isn't available for this meeting? In that absolute fire drill plan, as I'm discussing this webinar here, well, I'm ready for this. I can run it. Jeff's ready for it. He can run it. Well, what if we're both out sick? Okay, well, that's another expectation to that fire drill. And, you can spin yourself silly planning out every single expectation. Focus on the simple things first. Hey, what happens if one person is down? Okay, let's have a backup person. Okay, don't focus on if the backup person is down just yet. It's already hard enough to get that backup person trained and available and to be able to do anything that you need them to do. Let's worry about a backup to the backup later on. Kind of back to that rule of 3-2-3 backups. Backup person is just as valuable as backup data. Certainly technology can always be used to help these things. For example, back to that longer than expected meetings, if you use Microsoft for your email or Google for your email, both of those tools have the ability to set your calendar meeting invites as a default to 50 minutes or 25 minutes versus an hour or a half hour. So let the tool automatically do it for you. You don't have to worry about rescheduling each meeting to 50 minutes. Just set the default in the tool to say, hey, when I schedule a half-hour meeting, schedule it for 25 minutes. When I schedule an hour meeting, schedule it for 50 minutes. The tools can do that automatically for you. So let them do it for you. So if anyone was here in the past couple weeks, I always try to, keep this slide towards the end, a security checklist for everyone. This is how important it is to me that I keep it on every webinar that I do, is having a security oriented mindset. It's everyone's job. Now, I'm an avid hiker, backpacker, camper. I travel through the woods of all through Pennsylvania. I think I saw in chat someone's in Lancaster County. Hike through there, camp through there. Some beautiful trails through there, beautiful waterfalls in that area. Um, but I thought this quote was very, it meant something to me. I hope it can mean something to everyone else as well. Let's blaze the way to keep the blaze away. There's nothing scarier than being out in the woods alone and you don't see any trees that have any markings on it. You feel lost in the woods, and there's nothing more terrifying than that. When you get ransomware, when you have a cybersecurity event, when something happens to your business, and I use the word when, not if, because it does happen to everyone. Are you going to be able to see the next tree on your path? The one that has that big orange blaze on or big blue blaze, whatever color is on that trail. Are you going to be able to see that next tree? And if you can't see the next tree, what's your game plan? Do you have a compass to tell you back the way, back north? Do you have a hiking whistle? If you have a whistle, do you know how to use it? Do you know that three long whistles in a row means SOS? It means help me. There's actually a Morse code for SOS to do over whistles, but I know as a hiker, and most people who are out in the woods as hikers know if you hear three whistles in a row, whistle, 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 that means somebody's in trouble. I'm going to respond with my whistle to let them know, hey, I heard you and I'm going to help in that recovery effort because that's my job and responsibility as a human being to not let somebody be lost in the woods. So that's where it's everyone's job to help out everyone else, and it's everyone's job to keep security on in top of their mind. And through this checklist, again, this checklist changes slightly every week. I have a massive checklist. If anyone wants that checklist, you're welcome to it. But it's really talking about a culture shift towards security. We can't sit idly by as a culture and accept billions of dollars of our hard-earned money going into criminals' hands because they know technology better than we do. That's unacceptable. We can't have that as a culture. All that does is promote more criminal behavior. So we need a culture shift towards security. We need to be focused on our own data. We need to be fire drilling all of our processes and plans, even if it's in our own head for 15 minutes. At least you sat down, you thought about what might happen, and you put together a plan in your head for this is how I would deal with that situation. When you hear something in the news, you hear a big event, a ransomware activity, or something in the news about some business going under, think to yourself, how would I handle that as a business owner? Because that's a fire drill. Every time you're thinking about that as a business owner, what would I do in that scenario? That's a fire drill. Think of it as a fire drill. Think of it as having a scenario, an action plan, and a result, something that you can go back to and say, hey, how can I make this better? Encrypting your backups. I talked about this a few different times. If the bad actors have your data and they have your backup, say all they got was your backup. Well, if it's an encrypted data that they have, they're not going to have access to it, and the data is not as valuable to them. It's kind of like that oil analogy. Oil is such a high commodity. Once you start breaking down oil into all of its various parts, it's not as valuable, or it becomes more valuable depending on how you want to look at it. But your data, the more you lock it down, the more you protect and put layers over that data, the less valuable that data becomes to those people. So encrypting your backups, putting layers around it, protecting it, that's what we need to be doing. And again, back to that cyber liability insurance piece. If you don't have cyber liability insurance from your business insurance provider, talk to them about getting a rider added on. I think there is something about, in the chats about cyber liability insurance. I'll get back to that here in just a few minutes. But having cyber liability insurance is the first line of defense that anyone can have. It's kind of like having car insurance. Car insurance is mandatory now. You have to have car insurance. There's a reason for that. The insurance companies couldn't keep paying out to people who are uninsured. They can work through other insurance companies and work together to, make things palatable from a business standpoint. Let's be real, insurance companies are businesses too. They're not out there to, pay off the deductible or to pay off the claims. They're out there to make sure everyone's doing things the responsible way. That's the real benefit of having insurance. When you're getting cyber liability insurance, they're going to ask you a list of questions, basically like a checklist of security questions. What are the things that you do to make sure that you're protected? Again, back to that car insurance analogy. When you go apply for new car insurance, they're going to ask you, what model of car do you have? What make of car do you have? Because right off the bat, they're going to know, hey, how many airbags are in that car? What's the seatbelt situation like in that car? How many seats can be in that car? How many people might we have to insure that could be in that car? Can that car tow something? Do we have to insure that? All those things are, dictated by the insurance right off the bat when you go in there, your make and model of the car. Then you give them more info. Hey, you have how old is everyone going to be driving? What's their history like? You're going to have to give those same pieces of info to the insurance provider. Otherwise, they're not going to protect you on a cyber liability waiver. They're not going to protect you if you're not using some of the basic cyber tools that are available. Things like multi-factor authentication for your data. Eventually, they're going to be talking more about encrypting your data. There's all these different layers that are going to be adding on, just like the car insurance companies. Car companies didn't originally put seatbelts in all their cars. They didn't put airbags in all their cars. There's a reason that the car companies had to start doing it. It's because the car insurance companies were really mandating it and requiring this to happen. So again, that was a culture shift towards safety in cars. In the 70s, it happened. We lost muscle cars, but what came about from that? We had a lot more safety in our cars. Please don't anyone reference the Pinto when I said a 70s car, because that is a terrible example. So hopefully no one took that from that example. But cars became a lot safer in the 70s and the 80s because they had to be, because car insurance companies were dictating that it had to be done. So the sooner that you get a cyber liability insurance, hey, it's like getting into that car insurance game early. You can be grandfathered in with a lot cheaper rates than what they might end up becoming down the road. In conclusion here, I do always like to wrap up with this type of slide. Don't let business continuity or disaster recovery in IT. It's BCDR, another acronym. We love those in IT. Don't let business continuity and disaster recovery close your business. Business continuity and disaster recovery, having the right plan in place and knowing how you're going to execute that plan is going to make your business thrive in a chaotic environment versus collapse. Fire drill all of your plans. Use a whiteboard. Lay out your plan on a table. Consult different people from the team that, you might not know that the way accounting prints something is actually incredibly needed for us to be able to invoice somebody. Well, if they have to physically print something and we all have to go and work from home, do they have a printer at home? Are they taking a printer from the office and taking it home? Are you providing a printer for them at home? Or are you using technology where you don't have to print at all anymore? And hey, maybe that's your mindset. I'm going to start working towards, I don't need the physical technology anymore. I just need to be able to work from anywhere. There are plenty of local managed service providers. Again, another acronym. We have too many words in IT. There's plenty of local managed service providers, IT companies out there that are able to help guide your plan, help test your plan, ensure that your business is safeguarded. This is going to be an ever expanding and ever changing landscape. That's personally why I love it. I'm never going to be stagnant in my job. There's always going to be something new and fun and exciting to learn. So I hope that level of excitement did translate over here. I hope I was able to translate some geek speak into some common day language and give some people, give everyone something to think about as they walk away from this about, what would happen in their business if something happens and when something happens. So with that being said, I'm going to come over to the chat here and see what we got here. Sandy, you want to help me out if you can?
Yeah, Chris, Jeff, everybody is interested in the list, Chris, that you just referenced. Is there an email address? Maybe it's the one that's on the screen that they can reach out to if they're looking for like a PDF version.
Yep, we have a PDF version. I'm working with our graphic design department for our website where the same PDF that you'll see will be interactive on our website, where if you click on our checkbox items, you'll actually hear, a little couple minute speech kind of like this about each item. So that's in progress, but we do have the PDF checklist. I've simplified this checklist down to 16 main items that you should be considered about in your business. Those 16 items are, kind of I built it together from all these cyber liability insurance questionnaires. So yes, we can definitely share that out. I'm happy to send that to anybody. If you reach out to that sales@ecsconnects.com, Jeff is our one of our owners, but he's also the sales manager. So that's actually one of his email addresses that he helps manage as well. So certainly reach out to that. We'll be happy to send that over to you.
Okay, so scrolling to the top of the questions, John had asked, what are the pros and cons for storage and recovery of files, data, emails with entities like Norton and Microsoft for very small businesses?
Yep. So certainly there's a lot of pros. I mean, when you're dealing with clouds solutions like Norton and Microsoft, hey, the cloud, I discussed the cloud last week. I think it was last week, yeah, in the last webinar, in part 2 of our series. So the cloud is great. You can have some trust that Microsoft is going to do what they can to protect your data. Norton's going to do what they can to protect your data. But Microsoft, Norton, all these big players will be the first to tell you in their terms and conditions, your data is your data. And it is up to you to protect it the way you see fit. So what that means is Microsoft has this big cloud of data. They're going to make sure no one can access that. But if someone can access as you and they can impersonate you to get in, well, then that's not on them. That's on you as a business owner to make sure that no one else can impersonate you. So there are some pros and cons to that. The con is, hey, you have to provide a lot more security yourself. The pro is you can access that data anywhere as long as you prove who you are or you say you are. Now, on the flip side, if you keep everything in-house and you store all your data locally on a physical box that's in your building, well, now you lose some of that access from the outside world. You can provide that access to the outside world, but once you provide access, well, now you're like the Microsoft cloud. You got to protect from everyone else in the world trying to get in who's not you. So there's pros and cons on both sides. That could certainly be its own webinar about that specifically. But I hope I at least started to answer your question there, John.
How does one know when it is safe to begin using restored data if we are a victim of ransomware?
Interesting. That's a golden question right there. I had mentioned earlier on about recovery point objectives. Kind of tie in with recovery time objectives. How long is it going to take to restore your data? But how far back can you go? Most of the time, what you're going to hear in the news is, hey, someone got ransomware, and after the investigation, you actually found out through the news that the ransomware company had actually been infiltrating the system for weeks or months while they were planning their attack. So they were actually in the systems for a long period of time before they actually executed the attack. So say 8 a.m. on a Friday, they encrypt all your files. Well, if you go to a backup that you have at 7:30 a.m., well, does that mean they still have access to your files? That's part of that initial investigation period. And that's why having something like cyber liability insurance is really going to dictate your entire plan. Because if you have that ransomware infection, something happens to your data, your first call is to your cyber liability insurance provider. Chances are your first call is to your IT company to make sure, hey, is this really happening? And then your IT provider is saying, yes, I see this too. I can validate we have ransomware and a ransomware attack going on right now. Your first call should be your cyber liability insurance provider because they're going to dictate what we do next based on your policy. Their policy might say, IT, don't do anything. Their policy might actually dictate that they're going to cover the FBI coming in and they're going to cover a cyber security expert to come in outside of your IT group. Because a lot of times you don't want the same IT group doing that investigation. I'll be honest with you, a lot of IT people aren't honest. And are you really going to find out how something got in from the same company that's supposed to be protecting you? Now, if they were making recommendations to you and you turn them down, hey, that company should be an honest company and come back to you and say, hey, this is why ransomware got in. It's because this, and this. If you had taken our, recommendations, let's do these now, this wouldn't have happened. But there's a lot of untrustworthy people out there. So a lot of times the insurance company will actually provide a third party independent person to come in and do that audit. That IT company would provide all the backup stuff, all the encryption details, everything over to that third party company to manage the restore. So again, a bonus of having cyber liability insurance is someone else gets to manage all this for you and you don't have to deal with it. Some insurance policies actually will pay the ransomware and they'll actually pay the ransom and get your data back and do that. Some other things to think about are ransomware is kind of an easy commodity now. If your files are encrypted, the decryption key might actually be available publicly already. Because anytime the FBI finds a decryptor key, they publicly publish it to the public because they don't want people paying ransomware either. So that's all the recovery side. But now you have the people were in my system. How do I know they're not in my system still to this day? That's a separate issue that you have to be dealing with that cyber liability company is going to come in and help you out with. And your IT company should be helping you out with right off the bat, making sure the access is shut down. They no longer have communication into the systems. It's doing that, really long investigative process. You'll see sometimes, in the news, a business gets shut down for a network outage. You don't find out for weeks that it was ransomware because it took that long for the investigation to happen. So cyber liability insurance is really going to help throughout that whole process. They're going to help foot the bill in a lot of that, but they're also going to dictate what you do and how you do it. So really there's two layers. It's restoring your data so that you can use it, but making sure that the bad actors can't still access your data as well. So certainly a good question. Really relying on your IT staff, a cybersecurity expert that might be brought in outside. I've even had that myself where when the company didn't take my recommendations, they got ransomware. Things were so muddy, I didn't want to have, anything to do with it. I sat with that owner and said, hey, we need to work with your insurance. We need to bring in this outside consultant because I don't want to tell you something that's wrong. So we need somebody else to come in and do that for us. They came in, they gave us a whole laundry list of things, some of the things that were already on my recommendation list, but having that independent person sometimes can be very valuable as well.
Yeah, Chris, I think I can jump in for a second. I think the big part is having those processes in place, having cyber liability insurance in place, and having a team, whether it be internally or with an MSP in place, and then leaning on them to handle those types of situations, just because it's too much for someone who's not in that to, really truly respond to it.
Yep.
Okay, I know it's 1 o'clock, so if people have to jump off again, you will be receiving this recording, but Chris, there was a second part to that question about knowing when it's safe to go back into your restored data. What tests should be expected from our IT vendor to the extent that we have one under contract?
Interesting. I didn't catch that second piece of that question. Vulnerability testing, penetration testing, those are some keyword terms in the IT world. Basically, what that means is I sit here from my office and I try to hack you. And there's different levels of hacking. There's ethical hacking, and then there's unethical hacking. Unethical hacking are what these ransomware people are doing. But ethical hacking is finding all those flaws before the unethical hackers get hands on it. There's a whole laundry list of testing that IT company does. We ourselves at ECS, we actually don't do our own penetration testing and vulnerability testing. Again, security is a whole separate layer. We want to have a third party independent of us do our own double checks to make sure that I've put all my processes in place, and they have somebody else test it. Don't let the person who set up the roadblocks test it. That just doesn't, it's not a very smart solution, because if I set everything up, I know how it's secure. I'm going to get foiled at every attempt that I try to do to hack in. But somebody else that we hire in to bring in as an ethical hacker to do that penetration testing, to do the vulnerability testing, they're the ones that are going to find all those holes. They're going to see the blind spots. Because me as a technician setting it all up, I have security in mind. This is it, and this is the way it is. Oh, there's this thing over here in the outside world that security vendor comes in to do that. So what testing should you expect? Hey, the vendor who you're using right now, well, something happened. So they should be recommending things to you to prevent this from happening in the future. They should be recommending advanced endpoint protection tools and firewalls and all those technology things. They should also be recommending some vulnerability testing and some penetration testing. Again, as a professional IT person, they should be recommending an outside consultant at that point. You've already had an attack. They should be recommending you bring in another security consultant just specifically for that ethical hacking test. And I hope that answered the question. I know a lot of these questions, they could become their own things in my world. So.
And it looks like Jeff answered the other ones that were in the chat.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think I got them.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I see Lancaster County. That's the person that I saw down that way. I've spent quite a time down there. My wife loves Amish living and that concept. So me as a technician, I also love that too, that disconnect of, hey, we don't need any of this and life can still happen. So it's really cool to know that, hey, it's still doable. But yeah, if there's any other questions, otherwise we can wrap up here.
Yeah, I think that looks like it's it. If you do have any questions, you can always reach out to Chris and Jeff. Chris's information is on the slide.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. My information's here. It's first initial last name CMOREY at ECXconnectswithanS.com. We have our phone number here as well. Sales at is also a great place to reach out to. My direct email, I mean, I could be in this webinar for an hour and not get back to emails, and so it's always good to send it to a group email. Another point of business continuity, people shouldn't have your email address and expect you to respond to it. Sandy has the best email signature I've ever seen that specifically calls out, hey, this is an email. Don't read this if you're relaxing or if you're doing like, hey, this is work related. So work while work, don't work when you're relaxing. And if you can avoid it, don't give people your personal cell phone, your personal email, anything like that. Keep it to a group email, keep it to a business phone number. Again, I talked about this a couple weeks ago about the ability to, have your cell phone have multiple different phone numbers to receive texts and calls as other phone numbers. So you can do that, again, on an ethical way to make things happen. So like a little tie in there. That's perfect.
Chris, Jeff, like you said, we could talk about this for a long time, dissecting each of the topics, but appreciate what you've shared over the past 3 Fridays. And I will include all the recordings in a follow-up email. Thank you for your honesty, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Hey, if you can't have an IT person that's honest, what's this world gonna come to?
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.